they're going to go and look at the ranks of people they can pick from. And who do you think is going to come to the top of their mind, right? Are they just going to get the guy with the best skill set? Maybe, but often that's not the case. They're going to want the entire professional package. Hi, welcome to another episode of Baktari MD. As you know, the second season, we're going to be doing Crash CEO School, where we cover topics and material that will help anyone in a leadership role in any organization. Some basic skill sets that would be good to have. You certainly don't want to learn them on the job if you can avoid it. So we're going to go over topics that really will help you sort of excel the learning curve as you grow in your organization. And today I want to kind of do something very interesting. I want to talk about how to climb to the top of any organization and become the CEO. Like, what are the traits that you're going to need to be in that role? And of course, there's probably the traits you're looking for in surrounding yourself with people. But let's see if we can distill those traits and find out what they are. One, as the CEO, you're going to want to surround yourself with these people. And if you're growing in the organization and you want to be in the leadership role, you want to be the CFO, the CEO, you want to be in any of the top positions, what are the skill sets you're going to need to get there? Because I don't think, especially in most small, medium-sized organizations, people just get promoted without having at least a smattering, if not all of these qualities. And if we can better understand them, we can also look for them in people that we're trying to have join the team, as well as if we're in the team and we want to grow, we can look at these qualities. So let's do some ground rules, though, because these things don't work in any organization. You can't just join any organization, basically deploy the strategy and get to the top, because that organization has to be functioning, mature, and it has to be treated professionally. So when you look at deploying this strategy, we have to go over the ground rules of, are you in an organization that this even makes sense? And the first thing is, will this organization need or appreciate highly competent professional people? Sometimes you're in an organization that is in the midst of turmoil, change, leadership change, or is small and really has not implemented the basic fundamental structures that can appreciate someone who can come in. And we see this all the time. Someone comes in who's a real pro, has everything to give. The organization, for whatever reason, is not there yet. And so deploying the strategy in that kind of situation can be frustrating and not often very fruitful. So keep that in mind. The number two thing is not only is the organization, but is the person who, we'll call them your boss, are they there? Are they professional, committed, driven? And, if they're in a position where they're not there yet, it's going to make it very difficult for you to all of a sudden, be committed and be the pro that, we're talking about here. So understand that as we go through this topic, the bottom line is going to be your decision to commit to an organization is predicated on them being committed, them striving for excellence, them also being professional. Okay? So I think we got that out of the way so we can then talk about how to climb to the top of any organization. What's interesting when I try to distill this, the one thing I always tell people is if you're looking to figure out what kind of product you should put out as you join an organization, the best way to really do this is reverse engineer it, right? Because one day you're going to be the boss, right? Why not? So when you become the boss, who are you going to surround yourself with, right? If you can answer that question, it makes putting out the product that we're talking about a lot easier, because if you're not prepared to put out the product, right, that you would want if you were the boss, then there's something wrong, because you're saying, well, if I was the boss, this is what I would want from everybody around me. But when I'm not the boss, I'm going to, maybe tone that down a little bit or give something other than that, right? Maybe I'll just do the bare minimum that will keep my boss off my back, or I'll do the bare minimum that gets the job done. And I think this often, you see it, especially with what happened the last few years when people are working remotely. Of course, some people do a great job working remotely, but then some people basically do enough that they can say they've done their job. And I think you often see this where people create a checklist. Well, if you're working remotely, if you can accomplish these tasks, then we consider that you're working efficiently or adequately. So not to pick on remote work for now, that's a whole separate topic. But I think a lot of people, when they think about the product that they want to put out, you want to put out the product that you would expect when you're the boss, okay? And so if you really distill that, and as I go through all these qualities, there is one word that encapsulates pretty much everything I'm going to go through today, and that's being a professional. I think a lot of people equate being a professional with people who are maybe licensed, a doctor or a lawyer. I'm going to argue you can be a pro regardless of what you do. And let's talk about what a professional means. I think a lot of us sort of recognize it when we see it, whether you have a professional landscaper, you have a professional pool person, whether you have a professional tax person. The concept of being a pro means that you're going to put out a product that's really high level and not connected to any other thing. That is the product you're putting out. Think of it more like an athlete. When we say professional athletes, what are we really saying? We're not necessarily saying that they're unusually good at what they do, because that's important. But there are a lot of people that are really good in sports but never get to the professional level. When you get to the professional level, what we're talking about is that you can put out a certain product irregardless of whether you're mad at a teammate or something's going on in your life or you didn't like the way the coach spoke to you. Now, that may all be true and you may have to deal with that, but that's not going to impact the product you're going to put out, right? And we see this especially in sports all the time, where we say, well, he's a professional. So, when you're watching a basketball game, you're not wondering, who is having issues that's distracting them. Now, in rare cases, you do. But for most pros, you can't tell the difference. You can't tell when LeBron James, had a bad day the day before with something off court or whatever, or you shouldn't be able to, or if they had a hard loss the night before, that theoretically is going to impact his game. I want to not focus too much on the sports analogy, but I think you get the drift. A professional is someone who puts out a product irregardless of what people are asking him to do. They're going to give you their A game no matter what, even though their contract isn't necessarily going to pay them more the next morning if they put out a great effort that day. So the idea is, whether they just signed a big contract or they're up for a contract, they're going to give you the same product. Okay, so this concept of being a pro is really where it's at. And I want to really distill and focus that any job can be done as a pro, any occupation, any profession. The principles of being a professional apply and can really impact your final product. So let's talk about the ingredients. So I have 6 ingredients. I'm sure there's more. Within those ingredients, there's different sub-ingredients, if you want to call them that. But let's go through what I see as being a professional. The first thing is hard work. This idea of hard work, I think most people see it and recognize it when they see it, but it's hard to quantify, because you can work hard but not give everything you have. And when we talk about hard work, I don't necessarily even mean working more than 40 hours. But there are people who, in an 8-hour day, for the most part, maybe working 6 hours. And working the 8 hours a day, of course, does not mean you don't take breaks or you never drift off for a minute. But I think we've all seen it. When someone is a hard worker, they really come to work and they give it their all. Now, we're going to talk about how that's relevant in a little bit. But working hard is just one ingredient. Ingredient number two is really putting out great quality. So we're really talking about now not necessarily just how hard you're working, but what does your product look like? And I think we've all been in an organization where there may be 5 people in a department and there's just one person, their product is much better than everyone else. And now let's break that down. Why is that? How does one person's product quality supersede other people? Well, I distilled it down into 4 characteristics. One, of course, is skill. Now, this is a little unfair because some people are just definitely, if you're a video editor and you have more skills and you're further along in your journey, yes, you're going to bring more skills. Luckily, that's not the only factor, because then whoever has the most skill would be putting out the best quality. But that's not necessarily true, but it's definitely a factor. The next thing is focus and attention. You can work hard and have good skills, but if you don't have the focus and the attention to your work, what you will see is that someone with less skill sets can often outperform you because they have less skills at that point in their career, but they can put out a better product. One more thing about skills is people who don't have skills or their skills are not high enough, what you'll see is that they're always working on getting their skills to a higher level. Next thing is critical thinking. And critical thinking is, again, an abstract concept because when posed with an obstacle in your, let's say, work environment, people who have more critical thinking, and critical thinking is not like a light switch where it's either off or on. There's degrees of critical thinking where you can actually look at an issue and decipher critically what's important and what's not, what you need to spend time on and what you don't need to spend time on. For example, sometimes I may get a phone call or some member of my team will come and say, should we spend more time on this contract versus that contract? Or should we spend more time on this project versus that project? Should we spend more time going after this business versus that business? And then I may turn to them and say, okay, well, if it's a decision between going after business A or going after business B, which one is going to be, a higher rate of return? Which one's going to be worth more? Which one has a bigger dollar value? And then if you go, well, actually, I didn't look at that yet. I can get back to you on that. So you can see that someone's asking you a question without actually doing the critical thinking of looking at something and saying, okay, I'm going to go and ask someone above me which one is better, but I'm not going to do the groundwork and the critical thinking that would be involved in actually even serving up that question. And next, which is connected to critical thinking, is problem solving. And what you will see, again, problem solving is not a light switch where there are people who don't problem solve and there are people who problem solve. It's a spectrum of 1 to 100. But what you will see is some people are much better problem solvers. When an obstacle is thrown in front of them, they will not necessarily give up and go back and say, oh, I tried to problem solve and it didn't work, there was an obstacle. What happens is certain people, when an obstacle presents them in front of them, they will try to figure out a workaround or some solution. A great example of this is actually in a kids movie called A Bug's Life. Maybe we can put a link to that movie in the comments section. It's a very cute children's movie where these talking ants are in a straight line like ants do, and all of a sudden a leaf falls in front of the lead ant. And of course, the lead ant just throws up his arm and says, whoa, woe is me, what do I do? And of course, another ant comes by and says, okay, let's slowly walk around the leaf as a solution. Now, that's obviously a satire, but I think like that. I think like, hey, are people coming to me and saying, there's a leaf in the way, or are they coming to me and saying, there's a leaf in the way and we've decided to walk around the leaf? Sort of a metaphor for how badly do you want to solve the problem. And it was interesting, which we're going to go on our next thing. I often find that people who often can't solve problems like that would probably do it if they owned the company. Like if you sold them the company, they would then figure out the solution. So problem solving is the last thing on my list. So skills, focus and attention, critical thinking, problem solving. But going to problem solving, again, there's different degrees of problem solving. And as you see, as you become a bigger pro, you're going to be better at that. So you're going to acquire more skills, your focus and attention are going to get better, your critical thinking and problem solving will get better as you become more and more of a professional. And the number 3 things on how to be a pro is ownership. I already did a whole video on this, on ownership, but it's a really interesting concept, which is, are people putting out the same product as though they own the company, right? If someone says, well, no, if you sell me the company tomorrow for $1, I'm going to show up to work differently. Again, I'm not talking about more hours, which could happen, of course, too. But that's not the issue here. It's basically what happens in those 8 hours or whatever it is. In those 8 hours, are we putting out the same product as though we own the company? And that's what professionals do. Professional basketball player should give you the same product on the court, even if he owned the team, right? I don't think you would say, oh, well, if LeBron bought the team and could play on the team, he'd put out a different product. He's going to put out the same product, whether he owns the team or he simply is playing on the team, because that's what pros do, right? This is the running theme. Like, what do professionals do? They give you the same product. It doesn't matter if they own the company, they own the team, they don't. They only have one product that they know how to put out. And when you only have one product that you know how to put out, I think we'd all look at that person and what would we say? Oh, there's a pro, right? There's a pro. Because it doesn't matter. The pros, it could be their last 2 weeks on the job. They've already given their notice. But you know what? Some people, the last day of their job, after giving notice, the product they put out on their last day in the last week is the same as they put out 4 months ago. Because, as you can imagine, we'd all say it, they're a pro. And I think when you think about it, that's what you would want to, that's the kind of people you would want to surround yourself with. All right, so let's talk about the next thing, number 4, in terms of, how to be a pro, is integrity. Now, this is really a tough one because integrity takes all shapes and forms. And, as I was trying to figure out how to distill that, it became hard because there's a lot of overlap. But I think we all know what integrity looks like when we see it. I'm not sure where we can all write a definition, especially in the workplace. And let's go through it. So for me, integrity is obviously never telling something that's not true, never lying, never covering up, okay? And I think intuitively people think covering up for yourself, yes, but even for others. Okay, it's never a win when you cover up for others, because that also sends a message that you don't have integrity, and it also conveys that, wow, your allegiance may be to a co-employee rather than moving the ball forward for the company, which will help everyone. The other thing is, finding your own mistakes. If you make a mistake and you just well, let's see, if nobody notices, let's move on. I would rather see someone come to me before anyone finds their mistake and they pointed it out. Because, once someone comes to you and says, look, I think I made this mistake, blah, 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 on working on this project. Well, at least now you know that if they're willing to come to you on a mistake, especially that maybe nobody would have ever found, then you know that pretty much anything coming out of their lips is true. The other thing is minimize. This is such an amazing characteristic because I think it goes to integrity. A lot of times when people we're all humans, we all make mistakes, but when the mistakes happen, to try to minimize it and just try to make it sound like it really isn't what it seems to be, when everyone in the room probably knows it's much bigger. That's not a win. And accepting the size of the problem, the size of the mistake, sends the picture to everybody that you are an honest broker. Whether you make a mistake, we all make mistakes, but whoever makes the mistake, we're not going to try to minimize it or exaggerate it for that matter, which is the opposite. So if you're exaggerating the level of the mistake someone else made, for example, or for whatever reason the situation is, that's not good. So you don't want to minimize, you don't want to exaggerate. You want to be viewed as an honest broker of how bad the situation is. Because if you're viewed as an honest broker, that's the kind of person you're going to want on your team when you're the boss, right? When you're the boss, do you want someone who is going to lie, cover up, not find their own mistakes? Do you want people who are going to minimize it? Or are you going to want people who are honest brokers? The last thing is to deflect. It goes along with minimizing, but to deflect it, to just throw it off somewhere else. It's all part of the same package. So when you view integrity as having all of those things, you understand that when you're the boss, you're going to want to surround yourself with those qualities, right? Who wouldn't? You're the boss and you want to surround yourself with 5 key people. Why wouldn't you want that? Of course you would want that. So if you want that, why don't you be the product that you want when you're the boss? Now, the downside of this lack of integrity or diminished integrity is profound because there's a domino effect, and it vibrates and impacts other things. Because once people feel that your integrity is compromised, the question then becomes, well, we caught that. Well, how many more are there that we haven't caught? And so it puts people in a predicament where they don't know. So even when everything is right and correct, how do you know? How do you know which one is the exaggeration, which one is the minimization, which one is a cover-up, which one isn't? And so it really destroys confidence. And again, if you were the boss, and you will be one day, so which one would you prefer? Would you want someone who, if they say something, you can take it to the bank, you don't have to question it? I've seen it with myself where I may get a call from a client that says, one of your staff, blah, 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 did this. And I know that's not possible. So I can confidently, even before checking with them, say, I hear what you're saying, but that's almost impossible. I find it, impossible that she told you something that was, or he told you something that wasn't true, especially on purpose. I just refuse to accept it. Of course, I'm going to look into it. But right in the onset, I'm willing to stake my reputation that probably didn't happen or they're misunderstanding it, because I already know the person's integrity level. So it's just not possible. Now, when I can get to the point, and when you can get to the point where you can look at someone you're working with and say, it's just not even possible for that to happen. Wow, what a blessing that is, huh? Can you imagine pulling that card out in a conversation and saying, there's absolutely no way that person misled you or whatever, because I know that person's integrity level. I know they're pro. Okay, we're going to move on to number 5, which is a really strange one, which is never, ever, ever take the company hostage or ask for ransom. This is a tough one because a lot of the people who kind of put out a great product, I'm not sure they're really a pro, but put out a great product, often because their skills level is so high and they're in a position where there's not a lot of redundancy, right? They're the only person that has that skill and to that level, and that skill is so needed, then they start to take the company for hostage, right? And hold them for ransom. They start putting feelers out there, they'll listen, blah, blah, blah. And especially if, I've seen it where someone is intimately involved in landing a big contract or making a big splash in the company by, getting a new product out, and immediately you start getting the ransom and hostage letters or emails, indirectly, of course, if you know what I'm saying. Well, it's the time that we discuss my compensation, blah, 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 which of course is important, but the timing, if it's really timed around a recent success or a recent this, that you start saying, pros don't do that. Right. Pros, of course, are concerned about their compensation. They need to be compensated, over time. But if it's related to the fact that they're either in a position that has no redundancy, so they're going to, potentially maximize that, or that they've been part of a recent success, and so it's payday. Now, this is kind of two-sided, because obviously if you're in an organization that doesn't acknowledge or appreciate the fact that you're holding down the fort in a non-redundant position and you're holding down a really crucial job and doesn't acknowledge it both financially, professionally, sometimes even emotionally, yes, that's not a good situation. But even if that were happening, we're going to talk about this, well, the professional thing to do is not to put the company out for ransom, but obviously over time, it may not be the right company for you. But I don't think the answer is, sending in metaphoric ransom notes to saying, or putting out feelers that unless things change around here pretty quickly, I may be going in a different direction, which you may have to do, by the way. But I don't think it's good to put that out there. Now, number 6 is really do number 1 and 5 because you want to do it, not necessarily because you're setting up the scenario for a raise or setting up the scenario to make demands. You want to do it because you're a pro. Because even if you don't get what you want long term, in the medium to long term, you're not going to change your product. And yes, obviously, if after doing all the above, you're not feeling appreciated, you're not getting compensated appropriately, yes, then as a pro, you simply move on to your next endeavor. But not to do the reverse, which is to say, okay, I'm doing all these things, da-da-da. So I think that summarizes, this concept of being a professional. And then to put a ribbon on this is, of course, when you become the boss, I promise you're going to want to surround yourself with people like this. You will. Why not? If you start a company, what are you going to do? You're not going to look for these qualities? Of course you're going to look for these qualities. So if you are going to look for these qualities, why don't you be what you would want when you're the boss? These are the people that get promoted. When you think about it, when people, when leaders in an organization are in a room and they're like, oh, we have to fill this vacancy in this high level place, they're going to go and look at the ranks of people they can pick from, and who do you think is going to come to the top of their mind, right? Are they just going to get the guy with the best skill set? Maybe, but often that's not the case. They're going to want the entire professional package. So if you want to climb to the top of your organization, okay, be the person you want when you're in charge, right? Be the professional. And this will guarantee or give you the highest likely of you succeeding and getting to the top of your organization. Be a pro. Be the person you're going to want when you're the boss. All right. Thank you so much. I hope you like that. It's a lot there to chew on, but really a lot of this makes a lot of sense if you pull back a little bit and think about how you would approach things when you're the boss one day. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps our channel grow, and it actually helps us continue to put out more content like this, which I'm hoping you're enjoying. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.